Hello and good morning or good afternoon to everyone, depending upon where you are in the world. Welcome to our lunchtime session of CME Palooza Spring. I am Scott Kober, one of the co-producers of CME Palooza, and everyone is kind of clearing their throats. We got a big group here, so there's going to be a lot to talk about here in the next hour. And this session is called Forays into the 4As, a catchy little title, promoting systems-based changes in CME. And this session, this is our gold sponsor session, so it's sponsored by Genentech. So as always, I'd like to thank all of our sponsors for CME Palooza Spring. They're all listed here on this slide, but I will read them off as well. Our gold sponsors, Genentech and Prova Education. Our silver sponsors, ASIM, Forefront Collaborative, Global Academy for Medical Education, and Platform Q Health Education. And finally, our bronze sponsors, ACHL, Clinical Care Options, CMEology, Helio Education Lab, Impact Education, Integritas Communications, Connective, Primary Care Network, PVI, and RMEI. So as with all of our CME Palooza sessions, there are 3 ways to ask questions of our panelists. You can use the Educational Measures text line to send in a question, and the number is 267-666-0CME or 0263. You could click on the Google slide link found on the live page and make sure that you're clicking on the Scott session so that Derek doesn't get the questions, and then I will be able to see them. And you can also tweet your questions to us using the hashtag CME Palooza. That is capital CME, lowercase Palooza. Very important. So finally, just a brief speaker disclosure, just to keep in mind the opinions, discussions, and conclusions expressed by this panel are their own and do not represent an endorsement or a position of their employer, parent company, or affiliates. And with that, I am going to turn it over to John Ruggiero to get us started. Go ahead, John.
Thank you so much, Scott. Welcome everybody to this session, and we appreciate the fact that you are joining us today. I hear a little bit of background now that has ended. Okay, so thank you for that, Scott. I apologize for the fact that you do not have a live visual feed of me. That is on my end, not on CME Palooza's end. But we're going to keep on moving forward. I wanted to thank Scott and Derek for another fantastic day of CME Palooza sessions. And I also want to thank my colleague, our Genentech resident clinical scientist, Mihan Zakaria, excuse me, who will be helping me moderate this session. I'm so honored to be with all of you today. Special thanks to Caroline Robinson, who Genentech misses every day. It was truly a gift, Caroline, to be working with you so closely. And she, as many of you know, she helped us provide some shape to our thoughts behind systems thinking. So I'm so glad that she remains in our industry. And I wanted to thank PIM as well as RMEI, who helped us with an almanac publication last year that was converted into a TILMS clinical presentation at the annual meeting at the Alliance. And then, of course, special thanks to all the panelists who joined us today because they're part of medical education companies who have experienced and provided education that was with a systems level thinking tenet behind it. And those are Access, Clinical Care Options, Medscape, Medical Learning Group, MedIQ, and Prime in the best alphabetical order that I could provide for you. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time today because you're all interested in hearing what the panelists have to say, but I thought that I would do some grounding as to why we are doing what we're doing. It really comes down to about 4 points that are in no particular order. And if, Scott, you wouldn't mind just building the TILMS model so that everyone can build times not fully aware of what they do not know. And often we miss the opportunity of activating learners around a problem of which they are part. So imagine a world where continuing education actually gets the learners ingrained in the problem that they face, the problem that they are partly responsible for, the problem that they can partly fix as well. And just imagine the power that education could do or could have to move people along that continuum. We also know that the healthcare marketplace has changed and that there are systems of decision makers surrounding that problem. We also know that although there's been great CME for years, and we've had some great progress as well, it still takes about 17 years on average for evidence to be placed into care. That's unacceptable. We need to do something to collapse that cycle. And finally, we know when a problem unfolds for individuals, natural human behavior theory suggests that we naturally start to form collectives to correct that problem. So this really requires us to consider how our education should start addressing not just adult learning principles, but also behavioral principles so that we can put some performance actions into place. And in 2014, Genentech invited external thought leaders to come into our space to help us really face what was going on in the marketplace and build a model that would be an expansion beyond the current models that we have, which are just as equally valuable. But how do we expand beyond those models and start thinking about moving a system along a continuum of care? And that's where we are here today in 17. If you go to the next slide, Scott, think less about the words and more about the opportunities here. And that's one thing that I wanted to thank Caroline for as well. It really comes down to summarizing this in the following manner. Once a learner is activated around a problem, that learner with his or her collective system begins to understand the clinical gap that that system is facing. It advances that learner to address that clinical gap, aspiring toward the practice of a solution so that there can be allocations or responsibilities that extend the solution beyond that problem and continue to maintain the solution along the continuum. So this is really where the panelists are going to speak to some of the examples that they've experienced following the tenets of a model like this. And I'm going to turn it over to Mihan to start asking you some questions and really look forward to coming back to close the session with you. Mihan?
Great. Thank you so much, John, for that background. Amazing that TELMS can be applied broadly to different health systems. And when I think about the definition of such, the definition of an organization of people, institutions, and resources that deliver care services to meet the needs of target populations. Additionally, systems have been described as single hospitals, clinics, community health centers, insurers, or collective groups of such, either by geography or brand. A system can also be described as a national healthcare structure. Today, we get to hear from our panel members about their application of TELMS in a variety of different health systems. And to kick us off, Linda, could you start us with an example of a time when a system-based or geographic, clinical, or public health problem needed to be addressed, and how did participants reach awareness?
Sure, absolutely. Thank you, Mihan, and thanks everyone for inviting us to participate today. So our example was a period of time when we partnered with a rather large health system located in New York City, and we did this specifically to address educational and performance gaps pertaining to chronic myelogenous leukemia, or CML, and direct patient care with that particular health population. So this health system was comprised of a large minority and ethnically diverse patient population. And we were seeking not only to improve the long-term outcomes in patient care for CML patients, but also to verify whether or not the type of insurance or lack thereof affected the quality of care that was delivered within this particular health system. And so what we found was through doing a baseline needs assessment that was coupled with peer benchmarking and an electronic medical record audit, was that the overwhelming majority of the clinicians in this interprofessional team were not treating their CML patients according to recommended guidelines, NCCN guidelines specifically, for interval molecular testing. And that was regardless of the type of insurance or whether they were uninsured. So just to put that kind of in perspective, interval molecular testing is essential in CML to help to determine when a patient might be experiencing treatment resistance or intolerance to their first-line therapy. So essentially, it's a mechanism by which the healthcare team can determine when is the appropriate time to switch these patients to a next generation therapy, so that they can still continue to obtain, the best overall survival advantage. So this particular community of learners within this health system became aware of this professional practice gap by the exercises that I just described. And upon, learning, about these gaps that were in their clinical practice, they were able to see that not only in their personal baseline scores, but also when the director of hematology within this health system shared the results of our initial electronic health record audit, they became very aware that this, very significant clinical practice issue existed, and they were activated at that point of awareness to engage in education, then to begin to close those identified practice gaps.
Great. That is so interesting. We're often seeing that molecular testing is one of the key drivers to practice variation. I think, Donna, did you have a similar example?
Yes. So hello, everyone. I'm Donna Harris-Gabriel from MedIQ, and we collaborated with Duke University to execute a quality improvement initiative to evaluate HCV testing in alignment with birth cohort recommendations and referral to specialty care patterns within 7 primary care sites in the Virginia Mason healthcare system over a year. So clinicians within 3 of the sites participated in a series of educational interventions and ongoing reviews, while clinicians in 4 sites served as a control group and were not offered education. So at the start, there was a quantitative online survey to evaluate clinicians' knowledge of current guidelines, their reported barriers to guideline adherence, and knowledge of current HCV treatment efficacy. Additionally, we analyzed over 70,000 patient charts to analyze the clinician practices. So in the surveys, the clinicians reported a high level of baseline confidence regarding their knowledge of guideline recommendations for HCV testing, and self-reported that their usual practice patterns aligned with the practice guidelines. Actual clinician performance, however, as shown by our review of the EHR data, demonstrated low baseline testing rates among patients born between 1945 and 1965. So awareness and activation occurred when the gap in perception versus actual practice was shared with the participants, and they could clearly see where education and practice change was needed.
So yeah, once again, I see this as validation that sometimes what clinicians believe to be happening is not necessarily the case when a collective system reviews their full data set. Thank you for that example. Mm-hmm. Rob, I know that you partnered with a system and likely had an online component as well. What has been your experience with online education using the tenets of TELMS or other expanded learning framework?
Yeah, sure. So what we did is we partnered with UAB Health System in Alabama, and we did a program in oncology. It was on patient-centered care for CLL. And this was an aligned education initiative, so it was educating clinicians, physicians, nurses, PAs, even lay navigators, as well as patients. And essentially, what's happened is, providers are challenged with staying up to date on the latest advances in treatment, but also the quality of the physician or clinician to patient communication. That quality of that communication can have an impact on quality of life. Patients tend to be more comfortable talking about treatments, but not so much about their quality of life. So UAB initiated a survey instrument to the providers to really assess, their comfort level in understanding the latest treatment advances with CLL, but really to discuss their communication or the decision-making of the treatment plan with the patients. So I believe that the clinicians became activated about the importance of ascertaining the patient's knowledge of CLL, as well as their communication style with patient engagement in the overall decision plan. I think we also saw patients activated because we did a patient activation measure survey. We had a distress thermometer type of where they got to kind of rank their distress in terms of their knowledge of disease or psychosocial issues as well. So I think not only did we activate the clinicians about some challenges, but we also activated patients at the health system.
Thanks, Rob. It'll be very exciting to learn what you discovered. I'm sure that there were issues between what clinicians thought that their patients knew versus what they really knew about appropriate care plans that met the patient's goals. So Thank you so much for that.
Sure.
Kevin, you had some experience utilizing a partnership with Flatiron. Tell us about it.
Yeah, thanks. Hi, Kevin Oppold from Clinical Care Options. And we've heard great examples of activating learners, both physicians and patients. Another part of system-based care are the faculty that actually provide the care. And so, as Mihan mentioned, we were part of a large online educational curriculum that we did in partnership with Flatiron. And so we did a data abstraction of their EMR to really get a good analysis of real practice patterns. And in 2016, we found a lot of variation from recommendations, but one of the most notable was that there was pretty substantial variation in the amount of ALK and EGFR testing in their network. And so the example here is that we were able to take that information to our faculty who would never have believed that this was a gap, because this has been standard of care for years. And, you know, and prior to that, I wouldn't say that they wouldn't educate on it, but they wouldn't be excited about it. And so we were able to show them these data and show them that there's a real gap in something that all of our faculty assumed what was happening. And so we were able to activate them and really make them partners in this program.
Wow, thank you so much for that. It is so interesting to see how the activation led to a strong willingness and eagerness to partner with your organization.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, and we found that in other ways as well, is that sometimes the faculty we use are, you know, the leading experts from centers of excellence. And, you know, oftentimes they're not quite in touch with maybe the practice patterns in the community. So it's a good way to make sure that they understand the real gaps as well.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. And I want to turn it over to Matt. I think, like others, you present another factor that I'd like to call out, championship. Please tell us about your example.
Sure, great, thank you, Mian. So we had a really interesting opportunity to develop a large-scale initiative known as the DETECT Initiative in Alzheimer's disease, which, as everyone's aware, is really a national epidemic that continues as the baby boomer population ages to become something that is at the forefront as a national epidemic and just continues to grow. And one of the issues there from an activation standpoint was we need to be more aware, and we needed communities of care to be more aware of the fact that diagnosing earlier and creating tools for diagnosing earlier has been done, and we need to be able to enforce that. The other piece from an activation standpoint that we were trying to get was we wanted people to focus on this idea that there are new applications and new treatments that are hopefully coming available, and there's awareness campaigns around them. So we created a large-scale initiative based on almost creating our own systems of care within communities, and we had 51 live national summit meetings, 21 grand rounds. We developed a mobile application for these folks to go to and create these community of care, because we had national thought leaders paired with local experts in addition to the Alzheimer's Association at these meetings. And what we were reinforcing from a standpoint of the practitioners, which included primary care physicians, neurologists, and nurse practitioners, the remaining care team, and the idea of this multidisciplinary approach to early diagnosis and future treatment, and also general management of the patient. So we gave them tools in terms of this diagnosis, from the utility of Medicare wellness checks and different ideas from the perspective of care. So by creating this platform and system and allowing the Alzheimer's Association to be involved in that at each meeting, was really a generally aware of activating not only the physicians, but championing this whole group to come together and recognize that there's this new wave of early diagnosis and future treatments that we're hoping are going to be coming available over the next coming years, and people needed to be aware of that. So it was a collaboration effect to make that happen.
Thank you, Matt, for that example. Early detection is important in so many areas, as well as the other aspects you mentioned and new treatments and such. Thank you so much for that. Now, I want to turn it over to Caroline. When you were at Genentech, you were instrumental in a working group that developed TELMS. What has been your experience since then?
That's a broad question. I have had the pleasure of joining a medical education company, Prime, and one of my reflections since leaving my former role at Genentech, and John, I miss you as well every day. Thank you for that intro. Is that I've had the opportunity to reflect on the expansion of application of TELMS over the last year. I think back to CME Palooza last year, and we had a much smaller set of examples where TELMS had been applied. And I'm just enjoying this hour so much to see this whole group of people sharing their examples. One of the things that I've also been able to do is explore some of the body of work that Prime has developed, implemented, and now has measurement on for where TELMS has been applied, and look specifically at the steps and to see how well it worked. And for the example that I wanted to bring today, I think it's a good one because it takes advantage of both sides of the model, from both the clinician and healthcare team perspective, as well as the patient and their caregiver perspective, and understanding where they sit in their healthcare setting. So my example is also in oncology, and like Rob's, it's also in CLL. And the specific stage for Activate that I'd like to describe very briefly is one in which one of the core tenets of TELMS was to take advantage of literature that our industry has to draw upon. And one of those is this idea of predisposing moment. And that's really the essence of the Activate stage, or the understand the clinical gap stage, is making sure that folks know what they didn't previously know so that they can address a problem. And in this project, again, implemented by Prime in 2015-16, physicians were asked to provide their charts. And this project pulled across data from 4 distinct, diverse oncology setting systems across the US, and oncologists within those. And then their patients were surveyed. And so you have objective data, you have survey data from the clinicians, and then patient survey data. And the discordance and the root cause analyses that were determined or were performed to determine where gaps existed were eye-opening for the clinicians compared to the national standard evidence and guidelines, but also the clinicians compared to their own peers, and then clinicians' settings compared to other settings. And that became that predisposing moment that then set up a very successful implementation of the activities to follow, which I can describe in the subsequent portions of this hour.
Oh, great. Thank you so much. Caroline, I'm wondering if you could walk us through actually how your organization was able to capture or quantify the moment when learners advanced their activation into conversion and demonstrate that they understood the clinical gap.
So I think for this project, it's actually a really nice one. And there are other models where you can also see that movement from predisposing to an action, and then ultimately to see it reinforced. Again, using good theory from our industry. And in this particular example, that moment occurred when the clinicians were exposed to their own data. They were exposed to their data, their patients' data, and then that in a comparative way to other clinicians in other settings. They were then equipped to address those gaps through education and through some tools. But I think the moment where they were able to convert that into action was in their development of an action plan. And that was the natural correlate to their participation in the education. And they were able to pinpoint and articulate a very specific way that they could take an action, or their teams could take an action to address their own specific clinical gaps. And that's that moment, that evidence of that bridge. And that's exciting to see, and to see that the model was such a useful way to describe that progression.
Fantastic. That's a great advancement of converting information. Thank you for that example. Kevin, same question to you. The advancement of the activation into something.
Right. And so when we have looked at the large online program that I mentioned earlier, so it has dozens of different tools and activities. And one of the primary tools we gave was a decision support tool, where a learner could put in their patient's characteristics, their disease characteristics, and get a treatment recommendation from 5 experts. But before we give them the expert recommendations, we ask them what their intended treatment plan is. And so we're able to show them the differences between their intended treatment plan and what the experts recommend, and the consensus among the experts. And we have seen that sort of activation has led to additional use of the tool. And more importantly, they've come back and accessed nearly all of the activities that are part of this large curriculum. So we've really seen a moment of where they're activated and they come back to an online program, again and again, to get different resources, different activities. So, and I also think that is a large part of the activated faculty that I talked about earlier.
Yeah, that is so rewarding. And so your quantification in those is those accessing the educational tool to make change and to continue to do so.
That's right.
That's fantastic. Linda, different question. Based on your program, can you identify a moment when learners aspired toward working with one another to meet a clinical endpoint as a result of the activity? For example, were you able to quantify a practice towards a solution?
Sure. Thanks, Mihan. So again, this is Linda King with Access Medical Education, and I'm going to continue with the CML example that I shared earlier at the outset of the program. So during the rollout of our CML initiative, once we were able to have this community of learners activated and become very aware, acutely aware, of their deficits in molecular interval testing for CML patients, they actually pulled together a task force. And what that task force was designed to do was to change and update their recommended treatment protocols, or their pathway, if you will, within the hematology department of this large health system. And then under the guidance of the director of hematology, this team worked together collaboratively to come up with a solution, and they augmented their pathway to include molecular testing for CML patients at 3-month intervals, which is appropriate according to guidelines. And this was done as a mechanism for them to help to identify those patients earlier in the treatment paradigm, so that you could identify those that were becoming resistant or intolerant to therapy. You could get them switched to a 2nd generation tyrosine kinase inhibitor sooner in the treatment paradigm. And this action really demonstrated their aspirations and their commitment as a team collectively to ensure that better quality of care was provided to their patients with CML.
That's fantastic. We've just heard about a real-time audit, which we all know about that individual systems are expected to do today in overall healthcare system. Donna, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, in conclusion, really to measure the impact, if you will, of this particular program, we conducted a health outcome study at 6 months post-curriculum completion. And we did this, by pulling the EHR data from that same patient and provider population. Mm-hmm. And through doing this audit, we were actually able to prove that our educational interventions really had an impact on real-world clinical practice, specifically for interval molecular testing. And by the conclusion, and 6 months out, we were able to convert 100% of that team of hematologists to doing molecular testing according to clinical practice guidelines. And one of the really exciting things for us, and the reason why we get passionate, about doing continuing medical education and performance improvement types of initiatives, is really all about the patients. And in this case, we were able to have this community of learners identify 7 patients out of about 150 total, who were in the phase of being resistant to their first-line therapy. And this team was able to quickly convert those patients onto a second-generation TKI so that they were able to get an overall survival advantage.
That is amazing. You just really see the impact in patients' lives, and to think about if that was, one of your loved ones or as a friend. Thank you for sharing that example.
Sure.
Donna, same question. How did you capture the aspiration towards a solution?
So during this initiative, the clinicians within the 3 primary care sites participated in a series of educational interventions. So we had an online activity, a series of teleconferences, and then they were sent targeted email publication, which they applied into their practice settings. So we were able to see the impact that the educational activities had in all 3 clinics who participated in the QI intervention. The control group who saw a increase in testing very near the This was evident during each data review following the start of education. So not just the beginning and the uptick throughout each.
Donna, you broke up a little bit there.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
So where did I end up? Did you hear any of it?
Bits and pieces.
Maybe just maybe a top line, just once again.
So we had the 3 primary care sites. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. That participated in the educational interventions. And we had a mixture of educational interventions. And then they applied those to their practice settings. And then we were able to see the impact of that in all 3 clinics, as during each data review, we saw an uptick we showed significant changes in HCV testing rates compared to the control group who were not offered the education.
That is fantastic. Thank you for sharing that. Rob, thoughts about whether your program was able to quantify an aspiration towards learners working together to fix a problem that you previously identified?
Sure. I forgot to mention who I'm with, my organization. So I'm with Medscape Education. So so what we saw was patients actually demonstrated the ability to convert some information. They actually saw a decrease in the distress related to knowledge about the disease or psychosocial concerns. They also demonstrated improved disease understanding. They talked about greater satisfaction with the physician's explanation and a preference for shared decision-making. And so where we feel the program moved towards Aspire was the fact that not only did the patients have a preference for shared decision-making, but after the educational intervention, they actually indicated they perceived greater shared decision-making process with their clinicians. And then the clinicians at the same time also indicated that they felt the patients were more engaged in the shared decision-making. So we actually saw greater alignment between both the patients and the professionals in terms of kind of collaborating on a shared decision-making plan for their patients.
That is fantastic for patients. Thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
Now, Caroline, how about for your organization?
So thank you. These are all great examples. I just want to reflect back that the model has, and this group together have displayed this. We've covered the point at which a problem or a gap was understood. And then we've spoken a little bit about how that was addressed. So now we're to the stage of practicing the solution. And a way that I thought about this when just preparing for this session is, let's say that January 1, I set a goal that this is my year, my New Year's resolution, I'm going to lose weight. Should have, but. And it was probably really easy January 1st because I was highly motivated and I just made that decision. But we're in April. So at this point, if I've made some progress, it's probably getting tougher to sustain that progress, or I'm probably having to lean on a few people like, hey, don't bring that into the house kind of thing. So when I think about the practice to solution, that's really what happens when clinicians see their data and they're highly energized and motivated. Whole teams, patients as well. And then it gets tougher to actually practice that and put it into play every day. And new things emerge and new challenges emerge, and it might get tougher, it might get easier, or you might see ways where there's persistent gaps that you need to continue to overcome. And that is where the practice of solution model makes so much sense, to think about what kinds of resources were needed to sustain change, or to even extend change, or to overcome emerging barriers. And for this example, one of the key ways that was examined over time was to pull out EMR data. And that allowed us to, or that allowed the Prime team to be able to see where change had occurred. And that was great, but also where there were persistent or emerging barriers. And to look at that data and say, what else do we need to do to either sustain or extend this and get those onto the next level per the TELMS model. So that EMR data and then other physician data and patient data were so critical in being able to demonstrate that change had occurred in an objective way, but then also where we might need to add a few more encouragements or a few more changes, and to make sure that that was sustainable and scalable.
Caroline, it's so important that you mentioned EMR data, which we've heard in many of our examples today. Is EMR data difficult to attain, or how do you get your hands on that?
That's the question, right? Because we all talk about EMR data, or we hear about it, and we know it's important. We know that it's an objective way to measure both gap and solutions and impact the program. EMR data can be hard, but with proper planning and buy-in from any system, then there's the internal championing of that of the project for which the data would be needed and would need to be obtained. And with that championing, there are avenues to get that data and use it effectively. It can be very, very difficult. Of course, the right pre-planning is required to obtain HIPAA, or to ensure HIPAA compliance, to ensure that there's appropriate IRB review, to ensure there's appropriate protocol. But with a system partner where we all agree on the goals of the project and that it's a worthy goal, so therefore this is the best mechanism to do that, with proper planning and with a good champion internally, and having folks think about it together, it's doable. And it's an incredibly effective way to demonstrate both the gap and the impact that we've made against that gap.
Caroline, thank you so much for that insight. Now I want to turn it over to Kevin. New question. Can you identify when learners in one of your activities allocated accountabilities to extend a solution over time? Perhaps you were able to uncover new gaps and other potential opportunities.
Yeah. So some of this isn't a definitive way or picture that we've seen of our learners allocating. It's really a bit of our hopes and dreams and plans. And that is to take some of the lessons we've learned from the EMR analysis, from our online education, and look at regional variation. And if you can picture in your mind the TELMS graphic that John showed earlier, we're sort of going to swoop from allocate right back up to activate, and hopefully take an online program, lessons learned, to specific thank you. So to take it to specific regions or practices and partner with them to again show them the data, activate them, get them to buy in, partner with them, and make an impact from a larger U.S. system to a smaller, more focused system. And so that's really how we're looking at allocating our learnings.
Fantastic. Matt, same question to you.
Great. Yeah, just to build off of what Kevin said, and even said earlier around activated faculty. So I'm going to stick with the example of the DETECT initiative because I wanted to kind of share some of the scope of it. We had over 18,000 active users, both of the live and the online activity. I talked earlier about tools that we provided regarding the Medicare wellness checks, the Alzheimer's Association being a part of each meeting, each participating activity that we had. They provided tools to physicians and caregivers at the meeting. We also had quality improvement posters where people could self-select images that they would like to use with patients. And then we had 3D animations that were downloadable that could be used in the practice when speaking to patients, caregivers, or amongst colleagues within a practice. And then that whole variation of local faculty being paired with national faculty and creating this online Detect Owls mobile action website was really to bring people together. And we did survey interviews, focus groups, and the like, where we pulled people together to talk about what they were doing. And we found an improvement in the area of early diagnosis, which was one of our critical goals. Also an improvement of the awareness of clinical trials and different treatment recommendations that were being made. So across that huge population, we were able to do that, but we were able to do it at a local level. And from an outcomes perspective, when you're looking at Aspire specifically and trying to drive people to utilize tools, utilize what you're putting out there with patients, with caregivers to kind of have that effect of patient enhancement, patient activation. That's really where we're trying to drive people in creating this community. And finally, I just want to point out that in doing so, we created something that's really an ongoing initiative. So we believe that by end of this year, we'll have over 31,000 active users of this coordination of care site where people can interact with thought leaders and discuss their cases, which is an ongoing thing where actually a lot of the things have been pointed out around the use of evidence-based medicine, the use of diagnosing earlier. We actually have a poster coming up at the American Academy of Neurology that's going on this coming weekend, where we're talking about the development of this community's care, and we've been offered the opportunity to share back to the neurology community the effect that the DETECT initiative has had to date and where we believe it can go. So it's been very well received within the community and actually become a built-in system for them to come back to, which is what we wanted to kind of have our learners be inspired to come back to this initiative over and over again as a resource.
Wow, that's a great example of utilization of the tools and allocating resources towards the sustainability of the program. Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
Now, I just want to shift gears just a little bit and discuss these programs in the context of broader system goals. Linda, I'd like to know whether or not there was a time you were able to use the outcomes that you collected to help a system or goals or federal expectations. And if not, do you see opportunities in the future, or are there barriers to doing so?
Well, thank you, Mihan. At this time, no, unfortunately, we haven't had an opportunity. I'm hearing a lot of echo. Can you hear me okay?
I hear the echo.
How about now? Okay. So I do think there's a place for CME at the very heart of community-based healthcare delivery, and that CME really should be a mechanism to assist in providing the document that we need for that overarching federal quality measurement we've been talking about through MACRA and et cetera. I do see some barrier to achieving this evolution. Speak that there's a need for healthcare to have healthcare systems to have an appetite for readiness for change. Embracing a third party like a medical education company come into their home or their individual practice and look at their team-based performance is something that we struggle to identify that perfect partner. And sometimes these health systems just aren't interested, or let alone willing to permit colleague and work with them on initiative. And I go back to what John was saying earlier. Really it's essential to find a health system that's really a collaborative where we can talk about the roles and responsibilities and expectations and really have a collective championing for the cause. I think it's been our experience that there is a significant knowledge gap with regards to how medical education can be a performance solution, leading to higher quality patient outcomes. And I do think healthcare system decision makers really right now don't understand or comprehend fully value of light. So I think our biggest challenge is in doing performance quality-based improvement initiatives is finding that system or that clinical practice that is willing to commit to participate and really engage in an improvement. So I think enlightening the healthcare system with regards to the value toward achieving level benchmark expectations is really a critical first step in closing these basic knowledge gaps to overcome this barrier for us to have the access to come in and do this type of an education.
That's a great, you bring a point you bring up with the evolution of CME and, the impactful partnerships that are possible with health systems when there is a readiness for such a collaboration.
Exactly.
Thank you so much. Donna, how about for your organization? Maybe since we're, running a little bit short on time, about 1 minute.
Sure. Well, because our initiative was initiated through Virginia Mason, we were able to influence change within those three clinics. But we're not able to assess the system at large impact at this time. And to that point, I feel there needs to be a collective understanding that influencing positive, measurable, long-term system or institutional change requires a time commitment beyond what you typically see with most CME interventions. So if people understand that these things take time, but the impact can be huge, I think we'll see a lot of great future initiatives for system-based improvement.
Great insight. Thank you. Kevin, did you have a few thoughts as well on this?
I'll be brief because I know we're running behind, but I agree with Linda and Donna, with what they said, and really it's with so many great programs and outcomes and just all we've heard today. I think it's our job as providers to really partner with systems to help them understand not only the gaps, the activation, but as part of the activation process, really partner with them to show them how we can perhaps help them with MIPS or federal expectation. For oncology specifically, maybe the oncology care model. So it's really up to us to really, work together as a community and as individual providers to try to work with systems to help them understand the value that we can provide through education.
Thank you for that. And I want to thank all of our panel members for their participation today and sharing very impactful examples and giving us their thoughts about TELMS. This was incredibly valuable. John, do you have any closing remarks for the session?
Yeah, thank you, Mihan. I really appreciate the fact that you moderated this session. And, your partnership in all of this type of work has been tremendous as well, even just the past 2 months. So I really do appreciate all of that. I did get a text from my mother who said that I forgot to thank her. So thank you, Mom. The next thing that I wanted to say was thank you all again for being part of this. You know, one thing that Mihan brought up, which I think is really resonating with me, and I think we should pay very close attention to, each one of us has experienced care variation in a very personal way. We all know people within our family or in our friends circles that have at one point in time not received the evidence-based care or the most appropriate treatment plan that we would have hoped. This is something that should be sinking into all of our communities as we explore how to design and support education that matters most to the current marketplace needs. Systems can mean a lot of different things, right? So they can mean a local system that is a healthcare unit in a geography. It could be a specific geography in the country. It could be the national healthcare system, as Caroline has mentioned to me many times when she and I have been working on this for a couple of years. So you have to define what system is for you and how you meet that system's specific clinical needs in order to activate learners to actually make some type of change. And the one thing I did want to note to everybody, which I failed to do in the beginning, was not all of the activities that you heard the panelists speak to today were supported by Genentech. Many of them had been also supported by other supporters or sole supported by supporters that had nothing to do with Genentech's financial resources. So what I'm trying to say here is that, again, an expansion beyond some of the learning models that we already have in place, TELMS or the tenets of these kinds of frameworks can really provide value to the community, to the system you identify, to the supporters who provide the support for these activities. That coupled to get together with the learning models that we already have in place, we have a profound opportunity to help systems actually meet the mandates that they're pressured to meet now as a result of that marketplace changing. So that's all I have. Scott, maybe you had some questions that came through. And thank you also, Scott, for helping us monitor some of the background.
Sure, yeah. So a couple questions that have come in. So we've got about 3 minutes. So I'm going to throw a couple of these out, and whoever wants to jump in on these certainly can. Here's a question that came in. So what opportunities are there to partner with groups without a healthcare mission to accomplish some of the TELMS goals? So Mihan, if you want to throw that out to someone, that's fine.
Caroline.
Well, I understand the question to be, is there an opportunity to partner with organizations without a healthcare mission?
Correct.
So maybe a non-healthcare application? Is that what you would interpret that as? Let me throw something out.
Sure.
Because this is a session on TELMS. Since joining Prime, we use TELMS as a way to look at our own organization. And we said, where do we have opportunities to do better work? Or where do we have opportunities to do new work? And that meant we needed to understand what we needed to grow or do to do that. And in doing so, we applied the model. We said, what do we need to do? How do we do that? And then how can we put that into practice over time? And that wasn't necessarily just because we're a healthcare organization, it's because we're an organization. TELMS is, and John's spoken about this many times, is a useful tool because it takes advantage of the literature. Deming's model for quality improvement, that's not just applied to healthcare. In fact, we would argue that it was applied very well, and we learned from how it was applied to automotive industry, right? So TELMS can be applied in non-healthcare situations and be completely helpful. And that tells us more about the reasons why it's helpful in healthcare, because it works in systems where humans interact. Therefore, it could be an innately helpful approach for systems like healthcare.
Okay, I think the suggestion was like a school district, perhaps. That's an organization without a healthcare mission, but,
right?
Would potentially be a partner for something like this.
Yeah. So as a partner, yes. If there's a need, and there's the need to address that, and there's a need to put that solution into practice, TELMS could be applicable.
And I think, Caroline, to the point that, and I'm forgetting the specific name of the initiative, and I apologize to the University of Texas for forgetting the name of that initiative. But they did partner with a healthcare system and a school system in Texas in an asthma initiative using the tenets of TELMS. They didn't actually specifically point out TELMS, but they used the theories behind TELMS to actually show that by educating clinicians about asthma, they reduced the days that students had away from school, thereby saving Texas costs in care. So that's another example of how you can use innovative partnerships to help with this mission.
Okay, great. All right. Well, thank you very much to our panelists. I apologize for the echo that kind of came up. It took me a couple of minutes to kind of identify where it was coming from. So I apologize to anyone whose ears were burning a little bit there. So for folks who have watched this and any of the other CME Palooza Spring sessions, if you can please do us a favor and click and complete the short survey we have regarding CME Palooza Spring, and kind of give us some ideas for the future, that would be much appreciated. And to view the next session, for those who are watching this live, once we end this session, if you give us about 30 seconds, we will have the next session up and ready to go, and that will go live at the top of the hour. And so with that, I would like to thank Mihan and John and the rest of our panel, and wish everyone a good morning and or afternoon.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.